Before I speak about anything else in this new year, what I need to and what I want to talk about most, as you can imagine, is Janie. More than anything or anyone else, Janie fills my heart each and every day. The Sunday afternoon that Janie died suddenly and unexpectedly, all kinds of thoughts swirled in my head. I thought, how can I stand up on the high holy days this year? How can I stand up and talk about issues that are normally so important to me, but had no meaning for me at that moment? The saddest thought of all in those moments was, I am all alone now. Without Janie, I am all alone. 2 days later, hundreds attended Janie's funeral service. I did not feel alone. During the week of Shiva, my home was filled with you, congregants, friends, colleagues. I didn't feel alone. Periodically, our little grandson Parker would walk in the room, knock something over, and seeing his beautiful face and boundless energy, I couldn't feel alone. In reading every card that was sent and receiving each name of the hundreds who donated to Janie's memorial fund, trees planted in Janie's memory, I felt lovingly embraced, not alone. After the week of Shiva, we continued with evening minions in the synagogue. The first night, I drove into the parking lot and wondered what else is going on in the synagogue on that summer night. I walked into the chapel a few minutes later. It was just a few minutes before the minyan would start, as I normally do throughout the year, and the chapel was already full, as it is normally not during the course of the year. I was not alone. Comfort came in many ways, and each way has touched my heart very deeply. To be honest, all of that comfort added together could not come close to equaling another day with Janie. We loved being alone together, but it was and it remains a true comfort. I learned from an insightful rabbi some years ago, love is wanting to give more than you ever hope to receive in return. That deserves repetition. Love is wanting to give more than ever hoping to receive in return. I tell this to just about every couple who sits in my study before their wedding day. Because our usual concept of love is, I love him so much, he makes me feel, or she's the love of my life. What she does for me, that's not the truest expression of love. Love is, the greatest love is what I do for her, how I make him feel. What I give is the truest expression of love. Of course, no one wants to be in an unrequited love relationship. It's got to be a two-way street. But the truest love is still wanting to give more than you ever hope to receive in return. And that was Janie. Janie gave me so much over all the years, including these past years until the very end. So very much. Janie's very being made my life so much richer and brighter. And Janie gave so much to us. Janie made an indelible impact on our community in many, many ways. As we were falling in love, we would talk for hours and hours each day. But there was one discussion that we never had. Never had. In spite of the fact that Janie was in New York, in Manhattan, and I was here in Bucks County, we never had the discussion of whether I would move to New York. You know, there were 4 of them and 1 of me. It would have been a lot easier for the 1 to move to the 4, but we never had that conversation. And that's in spite of the fact that Janie spent her entire life in the same zip code. Growing up and living in the Upper East Side of Manhattan, going to college a little bit above the Upper West Side at Barnard College. Janie's whole life and the girls' lives were in New York. And then as Janie came to spend time here in Pennsylvania, as she called it, Janie saw how much I love this community and synagogue. And Janie came to love both as well. This was a very foreign world for the girls. The first time they visited, you remember this, Jordana? The first time you and your sisters visited, and you raged at that time, Samara was in 1st grade, you were in 9th grade. And I told this story about 20 years ago, 22 years ago. One day it was during Passover, and we went for a walk. And it was a long walk. And we were all getting a little tired, but Samara was getting more tired than everyone else. And Samara said, "Can we call a cab?" We weren't that far from Tanner's at that point. I said, "Samara, we can call a cow, but we can't call a cab." That describes the culture shock from Manhattan to Richboro. Janie quickly came to love our community too. Loving always meant giving for Janie, and so she gave. She gave to the community as a whole, and she gave quietly to so many individuals in our congregation. It happened often that Janie and I would visit a Shiva house together in the evening. And it happened once, and this happened more than once. When we were leaving, the mourner said goodbye to me and thanked me politely, and then gave Janie this great hug and thanked her for all that she had given them in that relatively brief period of time. And I stood there. And I didn't say anything, but what was going through my head was, am I chopped liver here? And then on the way to the car, this happened more than once. On the way to the car, I said to Janie, "You know, Janie, I know that person more than 15 years. You just spent 15 minutes with them, and you bonded so deeply that you were somehow able to give them something so meaningful and so comforting and so deep." And that was Janie's magic. Let's go back in time a little bit. In 1997, we began a project to write a new Torah. It's the Torah, the main Torah that we read from today, that we read from every Shabbat. And it was one of the most spiritual experiences we have ever had here at Ohev Shalom. We engaged a scribe by the name of Goldstein, whom Janie and I visited during our first trip together to Israel. And there was a great Sunday afternoon here when members of the congregation, and we had appointments, and yet still the line was long, would have one letter of their name. If their name was Moshe, the scribe would write the letter Mem into the Torah on their behalf. And then at the end of everything, we had a parade down 2nd Street Pike. You know how hard it is to get a parade down 2nd Street Pike? This is a state road here. And so I had to get permission from every business person on 2nd Street Pike. Got permission from everyone, but I had one last guy to go. Our neighbor over here. I said, it'll only take a half hour. Half hour. And then he said, okay. So it was amazing. We got the buy-in from everyone. We walked down 2nd Street Pike. We were walking with the Torah under a chuppah. We had our own band leading the way. Hundreds of our congregants, behind whom were Christian members of the community. And we raised a sizable endowment for adult education. And we've been benefiting from that fund for the past 20 years. And this was all Janie's idea. You know, amongst other things that Janie did, Janie was a Hebrew school teacher, Hebrew school principal, but her last professional position was Janie was an endowment director of Ramaz Yeshiva. When we first met, Janie was involved in a project that needed to raise $15 million for this new school to be built in Manhattan. Then it went up to $25 million and $35 million. Well, Janie had this idea, and we performed it. We wrote a new Torah, and we raised a considerable amount for adult education. For the past 20 years, our sisterhood, our great sisterhood, really our phenomenal sisterhood, which is a backbone of our community, has been doing an incredible Shaloch Manos for Purim that touches every member of our synagogue. That was Janie's idea. The heart of our annual Yom HaShoah memorial service is a candlelight procession right down the middle aisle of the synagogue, lighting Holocaust candles right up front. Janie was part of that procession, having lost relatives in the Shoah, having been the daughter of a survivor of Auschwitz, and Janie brought that procession here from New York City. Janie, together with Roberta Gordon. Roberta, where are you sitting? Roberta, there you are. There's Roberta. Roberta, we just saw each other yesterday. What is the rabbi doing the day before Yontif that we met? We were both in Costco. Did you get everything you needed? Greg, you were already in line. You guys got this worked out. Yeah, you're already in line. So Janie and Roberta founded a women's Torah study group with such a firm foundation it continues to function and flourish to the present time. These past years, Janie was deprived of so much. But you are all deprived of what else Janie could have given to our community over the past decade. Jordana, I said to you during the week, and I'm so happy, Jordana and Jenna, that you're both here today. Really so happy. So happy. I said to Jordana during the week of Shiva that I needed to speak about Mom during the holidays. And I said what I said in my opening today. I said to you, I don't think I can talk about anything else before I talk about Mom, and yet I don't want it to be sad or overly maudlin. And Jordana, you gave me a recommendation, you gave me an idea. Later that day you said, you know, why don't you talk about the things I learned from Janie? And I think that was your recommendation because you and your sisters, Ilana and Samara, all three of you learned so very much from your mommy. I learned so much from Janie. I learned about trust from Janie in many ways. Some years ago, I gave a High Holy Day sermon based on the book and movie Seabiscuit, that unexpected champion horse. So I mentioned to Janie one afternoon that I could use a Jewish joke about a horse, though Jews and horses don't necessarily go together. Janie went upstairs and within minutes came back down with a joke printed out. And I read the joke And so terribly reluctantly, I said to Janie, I said, Janie, thanks. I said, thanks, but it's not really funny. So we went back and forth a little bit. Yes, it's funny. No, I don't think it's funny. And then Janie delivered the line. She said, it'll be funny if you tell it right. Well, came the morning of the sermon, and boy, did I want to be proven wrong. Whew! And I began with some trepidation. I started telling the joke. And then I delivered the punchline, and the laughter was tremendous. Thank God! Laughter was tremendous. And I looked over at Janie somewhat sheepishly, and it was amazing because the laughter went on and it got louder. And I just said to myself, looking over at Janie, it's about trust. It's about trust. I learned how to play a hand in cards from Janie. Janie was proud and would refer to herself from time to time as a survivor's daughter. And this had great meaning for Janie. If her father, Oscar Trencher, Jordana, your puppy, could survive 2 years in the camps, Janie felt that she could survive whatever was thrown at her in life. And she not only talked the talk, she walked the walk. There's a well-worn platitude. We can't control the cards we are dealt, but we can control how we play those cards. And this was no platitude for Janie. The phrase was her guiding light. Janie played one of the worst hands these past 10 years possible, but she played them as well as anyone possibly could. I learned from Janie about living as fully as possible in spite of it all. Living as fully as possible in spite of it all. We say in Hebrew, lamrot hakol, in spite of it all. I've been amazed over the years by those who I learn about their life story and who have lived such a rich and loving life in spite of it all. With all that happened, it's not for them an excuse of why life is the way it is today, or why I never gained more in life, or why I never succeeded more in life. No. They live fully and richly, lamrot hakol, in spite of it all. In spite of surviving the Holocaust. I see people who live rich and full lives. In spite of abuse as a child, I see people who tell me their stories, and yet I see they live full and loving lives. In spite of terrible losses in life, Janie too lived in spite of all the limitations this disease imposed on her. Janie worked hard going to physical therapy 2 times a week and doing yoga at home with her yoga instructor each week. I should just tell you that Janie went to Bucks Fit for about 10 years. Very few people stay in physical therapy for about 10 years. And she worked with a physical therapist by the name of Carrie. He came to pay a shiva call, and this big guy, young man, 4 kids, strong guy, came into the house, and when he saw me and I saw him, he could only start crying. Because Janie was such an important part of his life. When Janie started with Carrie, she could hardly stand for a second or two. And then after some months, there's a gym there, and with Carrie under one arm and Patty under the other arm, Janie was walking laps. walking laps in the gym, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They were holding her up, or giving her some balance, but Janie did the walking. Janie never gave up. I would be amazed by the things Janie watched on TV. Janie was a great cook in her heyday. We would have gone home, Jordana, to a great brisket. Huh? And there was no brisket like Mom's brisket. I know many of you say the same thing. So. You all have the best brisket there ever was. So, Janie used to cook. And one of her favorite things was watching the cooking channel on TV. They could do what Janie no longer could do. Janie took delight in watching others excel at things she could no longer do. She never resisted the limitations. One of her favorite shows was Dancing with the Stars. She loved watching others dance. Janie lived with an amazing sense of equanimity, lamrot hakol, in spite of it all. Many of you have spoken to me about Janie's courage and how you have been inspired by her. And I hope you might continue to think of Janie and continue to find inspiration from how she went on lamrot hakol, in spite of it all. I learned about a deeper faith in God from Janie. Janie also had a profound belief in the world to come, olam haba, a spiritual afterlife. I had explored this topic repeatedly on my own in rabbinical school and have taught courses on the world to come. Janie believed it with all of her heart and all of her soul. And so I was so privileged to share life with Janie these past 2 decades. High Holy Day sermons usually develop over the course of some weeks and months, but this is really not a sermon. It is more my reflections on a love story that developed over the course of 23 years since we first met in the summer of 1996. And I want to conclude with just a few words of thanks to those of you who met Janie 23 years ago. For 20 years, you had, for 20 years before that, you had an unmarried rabbi, something almost never heard of. Almost kind of like an oxymoron. And then Janie came into my life. And I felt it then, and I knew it over the years, and I look back on it, and I know it now, that it could have been far different. It could have been far different, but from Janie's first visit to the synagogue in November of 1996, Janie felt absolutely embraced by everyone she met without exception. Though Janie had spent her professional life with many, many different Jewish communities, I don't think Janie ever came upon a community quite like ours. There are very few communities quite like ours. In spite of all of Janie's limitations and in spite of however difficult it was, whenever there was something special in the synagogue, Janie wanted to be here. This is where life happened outside of our home. Janie wanted to be here, and Patty, God bless her, knew how much it meant to Janie. Patty fashioned her own schedule around Janie. Janie would receive emails from the synagogue, like all of you do, and Patty would read it with Janie. And Patty would know what Janie wanted to be at, and so she would schedule her own life weeks in advance so that Janie could be here. Janie wanted to be here because of you. You gave Janie so very much, and I am forever grateful. You might hear in the tone of my voice, you've been listening to me speak long enough, that by the tone of my voice you can pretty much say, the end is coming pretty soon. But to be honest, I don't know how to end this. And maybe that's because there is no ending. What I learned from Janie, how much I love Janie, has no ending. For me, that story continues. Even without Janie physically present, that story continues. I've also been here long enough to know that after me comes Carl Goldstein. Carl, as he will do, needing no